Welcome everyone to the Hospice and Palliative Care Grand Rounds, part of the HAPC Virtual Didactics. I can't believe it's almost September, and Lisa and and I'm sure a lot of y'all are going through back to school right now, and this year has certainly flown by. If this is your first time with us, there is a link to register for CME, which is completely free for everyone. And I'll put a code 45 minutes after the hour in the chat. You just have to text the code to the number I provide, and that will go on your CME transcript sponsored by the University of South Carolina. Today, excited to have Lisa Paul with us. She's the creator of the Death Deck, and I'll get into her intro, but I knew about the Death Deck long before I knew about Lisa. And so it's really cool to see someone who's created something that could be so useful talk to us about this topic. So Lisa Paul is a social worker with a hospice and palliative certification. She's the CEO of the Death Deck, a company that creates tools to inspire meaningful conversations on what matters most in our lives and in our deaths. As a licensed clinical social worker, accredited in hospice and palliative care with over 18 years of experience in hospice and 7 in emergency medicine, Lisa helps people cope with illness, dying, and grief. Lisa is also an expert contributor for Help Texts, which provides expert grief and mental health support via text messages, and a volunteer with the Humane Prison Hospice Project, which provides palliative care training and support for incarcerated individuals. I've included links on the website to both of those organizations, Help Texts and the Humane Prison Hospice Project, so check them out if you're interested. With a passionate belief that peace at the end, begins with meaningful conversations over time, Lisa engages people in talking about and preparing for this important stage of life. Lisa, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Ben. I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. Yeah, if you're interested especially if you're interested in the Humane Prison Project, Humane Hospice Prison Project, they're always looking for volunteers and expanding. And so that's been a deeply rewarding experience, especially if you are feeling a little burnt out in your work in hospice and palliative care. It has invigorated me to be working with that population. So, oh, and Ben is saying that he forgot there's going to be some action. So, I am hopeful that you'll participate at minimum in the chat once we get to the gameplay at the end. I would love if people wanted to unmute themselves and contribute verbally, but I understand that sometimes we're not necessarily wanting to speak, but if you participate by the chat, that would be awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Oh, hold on one second. Up, you are not seeing. Oh, technical difficulties. Let's try that again.
It's not a Zoom meeting without a technical difficulty.
I know, right? I had it all set to go too. Okay, take 2.
Looks good.
There we go. Okay. All right, so just a little bit about me. You've already kind of heard this in my intro, so I don't need to really talk about it too much. I will just give you a little background that I grew up on a farm in northern Michigan, in a very small town of 400 people. Have been in Los Angeles about 23 years. But I do believe that my life on the farm helped get me comfortable with death and dying, and has been a big piece of how I ended up in hospice and passionate about end of life care. So, our goal here today is basically to increase your confidence having conversations end of life preferences with your patients, with families, and in your personal lives. I really want our group here today to be thinking about whether you have thought about these topics yourself, whether you've completed your advanced directive, whether what your preferences for end of life are at this time. We know that they may change with time, with age, with illness, but to have these conversations now with our family will help with being more prepared later. So I really want us to not just be thinking about patient care, but thinking about your personal lives, your parents, your siblings, yourself, your spouse. Have you done an advanced directive? When I've talked to my hospice colleagues, I still work part-time at a hospice, and less than half have done their advanced directive, and many have also said that they haven't really put a lot of thought into their end of life plans, except for that they want to die at home. So I hope today will help everyone kind of think through their own experiences as well. So we're going to start with a case study. And then we're going to go briefly through some common reasons why people avoid talking about death and dying. And then we're going to move on to the meat of the presentation, which is some tools to help facilitate these conversations. And then the last half hour, 25 minutes, will be playing the death deck and the UL deck. And that's the time when I would love for you to participate. You know, for those of us that are in the grind of patient care, we don't take a lot of time to reflect on our own mortality and end of life preferences. We know that doing so can help us build more empathy and compassion for our patients. It can increase our confidence in facilitating these conversations with other people, with our patients, if we are talking to our family and community members about these topics as well. And then, as I mentioned, it can help us prepare for our own final chapter of life as we, working in this space, we know that our health can change very quickly. And so helping ourselves get more prepared is a goal for today too. So I'm going to start with a story that illustrates what not talking about these topics can lead to. I have permission to share this story. You'll discover why in a little bit. But a few years into my hospice career, I knocked on the door of a young family's home. You're looking at Joe, his little boy, Dalton, and their daughter, Garcy. They were a few years older than this. I think Garcy was 3 and Dalton was 5. Joe came onto hospice in his early 40s. He had been living with pancreatic cancer for a year. And this is his wife, Lori. So when he came onto hospice, he was altered and mostly incoherent. He was restless and agitated at times. He was able to get up and move about the house. But as we know, he was transitioning. So he was having confusion. He could kind of mumble, but he couldn't get any words out. And this came as a huge surprise to Lori and the family, who were expecting that he would be able to continue to talk, pretty much until he died, because they had never been around anyone who had been dying. So Lori suddenly realized that there were all these things that she didn't know about what Joe would want in this end of life phase that they were finding themselves in. So one of the biggest questions that they had was, which many families have, we all know this: medications, medications, medications. How alert did he want to be as he was dying? Did he view the dying process as a spiritual one, like Lori did, and err on the side of less medication, or would he prefer to be more sedated so his symptoms were very minimal, which is what his family of origin his parents and siblings wanted. Um, Lori was making decisions on behalf of Joe as the healthcare surrogate, but like I mentioned, his parents were there, his siblings were there, his friends were there. It was a very crowded house of people. Um, and there were a lot of opinions, and none of them were Joe's. And I think I forgot to mention, I'm the hospice social worker in this case. I think I forgot to mention that. Um, so Joe's family was present and supporting him at end of life, in addition to his wife, Lori. Um, and Lori wondered how Joe would feel about visitors. Did he want this entire house full of people? Did he want friends coming by while he was transitioning? Did he only want Lori and the kids there? So without this knowledge, Lori felt at the mercy of Joe's family, who really wanted to be there, but yet Lori was kind of trying to navigate that. And so these are common situations that you all have been through where you, um, especially I have found with young people, when there's family of origin present and nuclear family present, and then um, typically friends also show up during this time. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of being overwhelmed by visitors, being overwhelmed by different people's opinions. And so that was what was happening in this situation. And nobody really knew what Joe wanted because no one had talked about it. So, what might Joe want to hear in those final days? So, as I mentioned, the house was loud with family and friends and hospice staff coming in and out. Joe's family felt like he would want to be part of this rambunctious, like very lively household because he was an extrovert and that seemed what he would want. Of course, as hospice professionals, we were suggesting it be a little quieter because he seemed to have some terminal agitation, and we were trying to navigate that and remove some people from the house. So, but again, I think it can be so difficult when we don't know the wishes of the patient themselves, and different family parties have different beliefs on what they would want. So Lori kept thinking he would want less people in the house, to have like a favorite cooking channel on, or something that, some meditation music, something that was calming. And his family had a different opinion. Joe was raised Catholic, and while his family was still practicing, he was not. He identified as a Buddhist. So there was a big question of whether Joe would want a priest to visit or not. Would he want the anointing of the sick? Would he be okay with his family wanting him to have that sacrament for themselves? Um, or was that something that would go against his current beliefs? And then lastly, how about the children? They were preschool and toddlers. Um, did Joe have any feelings about how he wanted the kids involved? So Lori and Joe's family is not unique. Lori did a really beautiful job navigating these decisions, and I did my best to help her along with the hospice nurses who were involved. He was on service with us for 2 weeks and 2 days. Um, so, as we know, there's a lot of second guessing and grief. I provided bereavement support for Lori, and she, like many family members, had questions about if she'd made the right calls for Joe. Um, if at all these decision points, was that what he wanted or not? And so she was processing and second guessing. And I have to say, in my bereavement support work, that is one of the hardest things that I think grievers struggle with, is this second guessing and this wondering and these, regrets about how they managed the end of life for their person. So, we're going to get back to Lori and Joe in a little while. But first, we're going to talk about why they didn't talk about death and dying, and why this is so common. Um, so what are the common reasons that people aren't having these conversations? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I think you all are familiar with some of these themes, but I just want these to be kind of top of mind for us as we're thinking about the tools that we have and how these tools might address some of these barriers. And then I want you to think about these reasons as it relates to you. Are any of these themes that you may have or might contribute to how comfortable you are having end of life conversations with patients and with your family members? Sometimes it can be easier to talk with our patients who are approaching end of life or with living with serious illness about these topics, but we aren't having these conversations with our own parents or spouse. And so, what are the things that's keeping you from having those conversations? Um, so as we can see here, the first being that talking about death is seen as depressing or dark or morbid. We, I think it's safe to say, live in a death avoidant society where we promote youth and agelessness, and so there is a theme that talking about death is depressing. Um, And then because of that death avoidance, because of these ideas, we don't have a lot of experience talking openly about death. And that's true probably more for other people than us. But like many things, it does get easier with practice to have meaningful, direct conversations about end of life preferences. And we know that the best time to practice having these conversations is not when a family member is approaching end of life. We know that this is also a common belief that people have, that the idea about talking about death will bring it into existence. It'll happen sooner if we talk about it. Um, and relatedly, it can be harder to bring up end of life preferences if someone is embracing their illness using warrior language, like battling, fighting. There's pressure to stay positive. I have found this so many times with close friends of mine. I had a friend that just died 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, and he died about 5 months after esophageal cancer diagnosis. And I tried so hard in so many ways to try to help him and his family have these conversations. And they were very much in the battle phase, and he had chemo up until 2 days before he died, which was really heartbreaking. So it isn't that we can always mitigate these factors, but I think they're important to understand and have as many tools as we can to approach these conversations related to each of these themes. And then lastly, in Lori and Joe's specific scenario, his oncologist and other healthcare professionals did not bring up the topic of hospice or palliative care, except for on his last, what would be his last oncology appointment. The oncologist put a business card in Lori's hand as she walked out the door and gave her a business card for hospice and gave her no information, no description. She just had this business card, and I'm sure we've all experienced that working in hospice and palliative care, where we are the first ones to have these conversations with patients and families. And so, um, obviously, we want to be reaching more people in our medical profession to be having these conversations earlier to help us all when they move to palliative care and hospice, especially hospice. So now we'll move on to the fun part of tools. Um, I wanted to use Lori and Joe's story to kind of illustrate some of the smaller end of life decisions. I think we often think about the big ones, let's get the pulse sign. Let's make sure there's arrangements for a mortuary. And then we're kind of like checked our boxes, right? An advance directive, hopefully, maybe. But I want to talk about some tools to dig a little deeper into these conversations. So the first one, and I've asked Ben to put those in the chat. So you're going to get a link in the chat of all, or links in the chat of everything I'm talking about. So that way, if you want to be checking these out as we're talking, that's great. I don't mind that at all. My goal here today is to give you some tools, some resources. Social workers, we love tools and resources. So I saw a couple social work friends or colleagues or awesome social workers here today. So thank you for being here. So the first one that I want to talk about is the Serious Illness Messaging Toolkit. It's helpful for public messaging about topics like hospice, palliative care, and advanced care planning. It's also helpful for healthcare professionals to understand what language people respond to best around these topics. So as an example, they suggest instead of introducing hospice as a philosophy of care, describe the benefits that hospice provides, such as if you want to be at home, hospice will come to your home. If you need help sorting out your medications, hospice will figure out what you really need. And if you would like spiritual care, hospice teams have spiritual care, including chaplains. We're hospice and we look after you 24/7. So these are messaging. I thought this would be particularly helpful for people in palliative care as some different messaging to try to introduce hospice. I'm sure you all have your tried and true methods, but again, we're trying to increase the tools that you have for having these conversations and talking specifically about what hospice can do rather than a philosophy seems to resonate more. These are evidence-based messaging that they've put a lot of effort into. And they encourage you to steal their messaging. Everything is downloadable in PDFs for your use. The next one that I want to talk about that some of you are probably familiar with is the Serious Illness Conversation Guide. There's a version for clinicians and there's also a version for social workers, which I love to see. It highlights the specific ways that social workers can facilitate these conversations around serious illness. And these are one-page guides that are succinct and were developed with feedback from individuals that are seriously ill. And in the chat, there's another link for a toolkit from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, IHI. And this one is more comprehensive if you're looking for a more robust tool. I think it's like 20 pages and has a lot to it. I've used that with my social work interns. They found it incredibly helpful. I think it's a great educational tool. Both of these are great educational tools. One is kind of a cheat sheet, one is a deep dive. So both of those are in the chat for you to explore. And then I'm going to move on to some less clinical and more what is the word? Not casual, maybe a little casual. Some books and journals that I think are really helpful. They're wonderful for patients and families, but they're also great to recommend for your family members and people in your life. So this first book is the Conversation book. This is written by Gabby Jimenez. She's a hospice nurse and death doula. This is a guide to talking about death and dying with your family members. What's really special about this book is that Gabby writes with such warmth and compassion. She's definitely one of these hospice nurses that you can feel just the compassion oozing out of the page. And so I find that my patients that are looking to have more conversations about end of life, they find this book to be really helpful for some ideas. This is more helpful for people who are in palliative care or prior. As we know, sometimes our hospice patients are too sick to participate in some of these things, um, but some are. So I have used it with some of my hospice patients, but it's also great for clinicians to read, to get some additional ideas other than what I've talked about today. Gabe has a lot of resources in there as well on how to facilitate conversations about end of life. And it is written for lay public as well. The Hospice Doctor's Widow is this beautiful book. It's it's a journal, like an art journal, and it was written by Jennifer O'Brien. I'm going to read you a page. Today I couldn't open a jar. I didn't ask him because I am certain he is too weak. My heart is broken that he's no longer my strong husband who can open jars for me. Asking him would have only broken his heart too. And then she has a little jar. So what's really beautiful about this book is that it incorporates art. It's it's done in a way that includes these really raw reflections from Jennifer, who was married to a hospice doctor who died of cancer, and she was his primary caregiver. And so, because she was married to a hospice doctor, they did a lot of prep ahead of time, which she talks about. But he didn't want hospice and was reluctant about palliative care. And so she really became kind of everything to him. And she talks about in her journal. She also talks about her grief experience. So I've given this to given slash lent to spouses or significant others of some of my patients who are eager for resources and are feeling alone in their journey. And because of the art aspect, it's a little bit softer and a kind of different resource than we typically use in hospice, like the Barbara Carnes books. This is a little bit, it's very beautiful. I think it's a wonderful resource. And then some of you might be familiar with Nothing to Fear. This is written by hospice nurse Julie. She's a social media influencer and a hospice nurse. And she wrote a book called Nothing to Fear, and then she released this journal of the same name. And it's great again for clinicians that are trying to personally increase your comfort with feelings around death and well wishes, but it's designed for anyone caring for a family member on hospice or facing their own end of life transition. And I'm just going to read you a couple of the sections or descriptions, the journal prompts. So think back to the passing of a loved one that felt peaceful and filled with love and care. What went smoothly? How were you able to be present for this person as their end of life approached? How were others present and caring? Are there things that you would change about this experience, even if there are things that went well? Now think back to the passing of a loved one that did not feel peaceful or filled with love and care. What was missing? And it continues to follow along that path. So it helps people think back to their prior experiences with death and dying and what they wanted to glean from those experiences. The other section of the book, the journal, includes advice for the dying, advice for caregivers, and practical considerations. I know that each of these resources, they do cost money. I have to, I do, some hospice providers will provide some of these. Others, we have kind of a sharing library that I've set up with my hospice social workers. And granted, it's mostly me contributing to the library, but that's okay. And we share resources. And most of the time, families don't necessarily want to keep the books. Sometimes Sometimes I will make copies of a particular page that I think might be helpful for someone too. So there's a lot of creative ways to use this without giving everyone a $20 book. And then, so what other tools do we have? In addition to books and journals and toolkits, we have games. So I'm going to start with the Go Wish game. Um, I'm not, maybe some of you have heard of Go Wish. Uh, there's an online version and a physical deck of cards. So people basically put cards into three categories, and each category only holds a certain amount of cards. And so you have to decide of these cards what is most important, very important, somewhat important, or not important. And so here's a few examples of what you're selecting. On the online version, you're clicking them. So if you use an iPad for work, you can use an iPad to have patients drag the individual cards, or you can buy the deck of cards online as well. But a few examples of what the questions are about that you're putting into the three categories are to not die alone, to maintain my dignity, to know how my body will change, to have a nurse I really like. So people are deciding how important those things are, including not important at all. And that can help guide both the family and our care in terms of what is most important to the patient. And now we'll move towards the Death Deck, which Ben mentioned is a tool that I created with Lori, going back to Joe and Lori. Lori reached out to me many years after Joe's death, and we ended up talking about what we could do to help people have these conversations sooner. She kept questioning why she had done all this prep work. They had an advanced care plan, they had a living trust, they had health insurance, but they had never had any of these conversations that would have helped her in guiding Joe's final days. And so we decided to create a game to reach people who are reluctant to have these conversations. And we developed this in 2018. So our intent was to reach people ideally before a serious diagnosis or a medical crisis occurs. And we used humor and multiple choice questions to make the topic more approachable and to show people that talking about death and dying doesn't have to be scary, and we can even laugh about it. I use a selection. Well, I'll go back. The goal is to normalize these conversations and help people discuss these important topics before a life-limiting diagnosis. And so it's most often used for game nights, icebreakers for advanced care plan meetings, healthcare conferences. I use it a lot at senior centers and community outreach. We host these things called Death Over Drafts, where we bring death into breweries around LA and the country. And so I admit I use some of these cards with my hospice patients, but they are select cards. There's 112 questions, and so some are best for game night talk with family and friends, and some are appropriate for use with patients and families. So I always tell people to stack the deck, create the deck that fits the audience that you're trying to work with. So now we get into the fun part where we are able to get some participation here. So I'm going to start with an easy one. And the more you all participate, the more that Ben doesn't have to participate. So the first question is, would there be differences in how your family would treat your medical condition if you couldn't speak for yourself? No, I've been very clear with instructions. B, they would argue but ultimately agree. Or C, yes, they struggle with choosing a restaurant. So, um, Ben, what do you think?
I think it depends on the condition, right? I think, if I were to have a cancer,
Mhm.
um, and a diagnosis that, like your case study, eventually leading to end of life, I would have a lot more opportunity to have that conversation with them, than, if I had a huge hemorrhagic stroke when I was otherwise healthy and was suddenly incapacitated. I think they have general ideas about, so in that case, I'd pick A. I think B would be that scenario where the neurointensivist and the neurosurgeon say, well, he may be able to know that you're there at some point. Um, that, they may say, I don't think he would really want that. But also, I struggle choosing a restaurant. So I think it's very situational for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think, um, yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. I think there is, do you have an advanced directive?
No, I don't. I don't know if my mom is actually on. And I hate to put you on the spot, Mom, to talk about my end of life. But are you in a place where you can unmute, or are you talk about
Yes,
Putnam? Oh,
yes,
yeah.
I can unmute. Dad's here with me too.
So, Mom, if I got a big stroke and the doctors were saying I he's not going to be able to play ultimate frisbee anymore, but he may be able to be there to watch his kids grow up. Do you think I'd want that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. What if I couldn't enjoy watching the Cleveland Browns lose?
Well, that's a deep question. Um, because I guess, your treatment plan would, I think, come into effect then. What would be our options for you?
Well, would you have me live in a long-term acute care hospital with a tracheostomy and a peg tube, if I couldn't if I couldn't be conscious?
No.
Pretty definitive, Mom.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't want that, right?
You're right. You're right.
Okay.
All
We got
right, all right. This is some excellent modeling of family communication, Ben. Thank you, Susan.
Oh, you're welcome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think this is an exact beautiful way in which we can use tools like the Death Deck to stimulate conversations with our family. I love all the A's I'm seeing. I do want to encourage everyone to complete their advanced directive, to make sure that the people we want speaking for us, that know our wishes, are the ones given that power. And most importantly, that they know our wishes, right? Just like Ben and Susan. So, and Ben, I'm gonna prod you that you could probably keep up your conversations with Susan in more detail about some of those nuances. Um, and then this question, which this one I do is one that I do use with hospice patients. When you are dying, what will matter most? Comfort and freedom, having my loved ones by my side, or spiritual support in transitioning to the other side? A lot of people answer multiple in this. They'll say A and B, or they'll say D, all of the above, or they'll say E, something else. Sometimes people will tell me um, that it's most important to have their dog with them, and they want to be clear about that, or it's most important to um, have certain people by their side, and they want to be specific about that. So the it's not that we're trying to get people to absolutely choose one answer or not all of them. We're trying to help talk through, these are conversation starters so that you can have more in-depth conversations um, about what matters most. Ben, what do you think? Or does anyone else want to answer? I see in the chat.
Yeah, I agree with Lauren King, that, you know, being a hospice and palliative care doctor, and if we're plugged in, that I think all the patients should have to worry about is their family and trust that the medical team is going to take care of everything else. Or the
Yes,
interdisciplinary hospice and palliative care team is going to take care of everything else.
if you have a good hospice or palliative care team, that is true. If not, maybe you want to bring a death doula in or somebody to help with that, because we know that not all hospice and palliative care programs are created equal, in my experience. But I agree with you. I think um, my answer honestly used to be A because I've had a lot of chronic health issues and a lot of pain, and I was really fearful of pain. But currently, my answer is back to B, that I have confidence in hopefully my hospice team would take care of me. So next, we're moving on to medication. You're dying. Should your family err on the side of A, over medicating, let me ride off into the sunset on a magical unicorn? B, moderation, I want to say goodbyes but not be in pain. Or C, caution, minimal medication, I want to be present as possible. As I mentioned earlier, we all know that morphine and how much medication to use is one of the biggest arguments that our families have. I think that talking about medication is the most important thing we can be doing early on with patients so that we can, patients and the family system, so that we can all be on the same page when that person begins transitioning and needs more medication. So I'm seeing equal A and B, which does not surprise me for this group. I'm not seeing a lot of C's. And, you know, again, mine used to be A because I'm between an A and B. It depends on the day. It depends on how I'm getting along with my family. No, just kidding. But yeah, does anyone want to share about their answer?
I will, because I also used to be an A.
Yeah.
I would say earlier in my career and younger, be like, just take me on out. Don't want to be aware, don't want to be awake. I found the older I get,
Mm-hmm.
the more different things and priorities shift a little bit. So I think it
Yeah.
just kind of speaks to revisiting these conversations and how important that is. So I'm leaning more towards B these days.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I think there is time just speeds up as we get older, right? And my son's now a junior in high school, and now it's like, oh, I want every minute at the moment, right? Um, but if I live to be 85, I probably won't feel the exact same way, right? And so that is why we want to be having these conversations on a regular basis, or be checking in um, with our decision makers. Thank you, Lauren. How about you, Jessica?
Yeah, I wasn't going to respond to an answer so much, though I do think it's B for me today. But I do think you bring up a lovely point, Lisa, that for so many families, I do hear, especially early, like in the outpatient setting early on, as I'm getting to know them, that they fear enrolling in hospice because of then comes that story you mentioned. Their mom, they just gave morphine and she died right away, or this. And I think that you brought up, like, that's a beautiful segue to say, well, let's talk about what is really important when that time comes, rather than trying to turn that into a defense or trying to explain away hospice, which we sometimes do. That's
Yeah.
like maybe a better follow-up question if you can
Mhm.
get in. And I've never really thought about that before. as a
Mhm.
follow-up question to that, because I always think I want to defend hospice or the opposite, be like, oh, that was hard, and make a nice empathic statement instead of being curious about it and talking about what is important to them if they get in a lot of pain at the end of life.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I think that's such a great point, Jessica. I think um I think when we can lead with curiosity, first of all, it humbles us. We are putting the patient and family system as the experts, and we're deepening our connection with them if we are being curious and asking questions about medication, about what's most important to them at that point. Um, yeah, so holding on to that curiosity as we move through these questions would be beautiful. Okay, so this one is a fun one. This is not for hospice patients, but people in the community love this one. We have lively conversations about it. If a drug were created to prevent immortality, would you take it? Totally. Who wouldn't want to live forever? Nope, one lifetime is plenty. Or maybe if I could lock in my hottest age. I think what age you are is really important in this conversation. But the big question becomes, is everyone you know going to also be at their hottest age, and or are they going to live forever too, right? So anyone want to jump in on this one? A, Andrew, B.
Manny and Katie in
Okay,
20
they're
in
answering as a
21
group.
in 2125. Let's meet in Paris.
That is awesome. I am curious about the people that say C. Um, I yeah, I'm curious about that. I would never want to live forever. That's my perception, but but maybe I'm just like maybe I'm older than the group here that's answering C. Okay, fun, fun. Okay. I want to make sure. Are we ending right at 12, Ben? I'm deciding if I'm
Work. I
to
mean,
skip.
people can drop off if they need to drop off, but let's go.
Okay. 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 I'm going to move on to the EOL deck just to make sure that we get through some of these. Again, I really appreciate everyone answering in the chat. I am reading your answers and loving that everyone is participating so much. Oh, I see. I do like Mariana's answer, to be alive while my husband and daughter are and live independently. Yeah, I can see that. Okay. So the death deck, is our fun, lively one. I don't bring this deck into hospice patients, except for a few sassy old ladies who have a wicked sense of humor who absolutely love this and don't want me bringing this soft little wimpy deck in their house. So it isn't soft and wimpy, but that's what she called it. But this is the end of life deck, and it's designed for people in their final chapter of life. So our hospice and palliative care patients. I use this some in assisted livings as well as the death deck is kind of a combination of the two. Um, so the questions are a little bit the questions are focused on end of life preferences. So there aren't any questions about if you'd want to live forever, because that would be insensitive to a person with a life limiting diagnosis. There's specifically about end of life preferences and legacy building. And one of the reasons that I love tools so much, and I'm sure many of you feel this too, but when you have a card or a Barbara Carnes gone from my site and you're referencing that, or you have a card that's between you and the patient, it helps reduce the vulnerability just a little bit because you're looking at the card, you're reading from the book, you're not staring into someone's eyes asking deeply personal questions. Of course, you're still engaged and making eye contact and all those things, but it's more like we're solving a task or we're going through something together rather than just having a conversation, which I find can be helpful. So this is for discussion with patients on end-of-life preferences, legacy building, and anyone can answer these questions. It's just that they are designed to be used with people approaching end of life, but you can answer them now, and we're going to. So this is how I usually introduce it. Obviously, everyone has their own language, but I say I have this deck of cards that can help us talk about what's most important to us now, to you now and in your future, and it'll help us understand your wishes and preferences so we can do our best to honor them. Ideally, I love to have these conversations with the patient and family, but sometimes I will have them with the patient first. And this is only after I've assessed the readiness and used clinical judgment to whether this family would be a good candidate to have these conversations, because we know that some people haven't even acknowledged that the person's on hospice. So I'm not saying that any of these tools should be used for everyone, but but for some patients that are and family systems that are more open. So this is the first question that I usually ask people. How direct would you like medical professionals to be when explaining disease progression and the dying process? A, tell it like it is, all of it. B, be direct with family, but gentler with me. Or C, stick with the basics. I'd like to keep it a mystery. So this can be incredibly helpful. I actually have used this cards to navigate some people, some family systems that said that they didn't want their person to know that they were dying. And I said, that's okay. This person was cognizant. This person did not have dementia. And so I said, okay, but I do want to ask them this question, and they agreed to it. And then the person said, tell it like it is, all of it. And so we were able to basically get the family to acknowledge that we could talk about the fact that we were hospice. But not everyone wants to have all the information. So for patients that do, I like to bring out Barbara Carnes Gone From My Sight early on and go through that with them. So this can be a really helpful tool to get things started. Oh, good. I'm seeing one B, be direct with, be direct with me, but gentler with my family. Yes, that is another option not listed. Thank you for bringing that one up. So you are A with, I mean, you want to know. Okay. Oh, and we have a C. Awesome. I like the diversity there. I do see mostly A's, and that doesn't surprise me given our work. The next question is, I'm going a little faster because I want to make sure that we get to a couple more questions here. Are you comfortable having visitors as you decline? A, yes, I'll take whoever will come. Bonus points if they make me laugh. B, maybe if I'm not feeling too horrible that day. Or C, nothing personal, but I only want a select few guests at the time. This is something that comes up a lot, and I don't think that we often talk with patients about this before they lose capacity to decide how they feel about visitors. So this is another option. And you don't actually have to use the cards. If you want to look at the cards to get some ideas, you can use your words and not use the cards. But these are things that will help our patients have more of the death that they want if we are able to get to some of these questions. I saw a lot of, right, I'm going to go back here. C. Oh, we have quite a variety, a lot of C's, only a few select guests at a time. I used to think that I wanted everyone around me, and then I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I realized that that's not how I feel when I feel sick. And so I am also a C. Um, oh, if hospice is providing good mouth care, then I'm open to more gas, but too many crusty lips are not always taken care of. Oh, yes, mouth care. Um, as you approach the end, what would you like to hear? Podcasts or inspirational words, my favorite music, ocean or nature sounds. People always will throw in a TV show, Friends, or something like that. Um, this, I think, is something that isn't talked about very often and is pretty important too, because we just don't. Family members and hospice staff kind of make assumptions sometimes about what people want in the background. I walked into this patient's house one time and it was dead silent, and the patient was struggling a little bit with was having some shortness of breath, and the nurse and I got there, and it was so quiet. And so I said, does your mom like music, or do you want to put anything on? And he said, no, she only loves silence. She would be so upset if we put anything on. I said, okay. So we kind of just sat in silence during the continuous care. So, oh, playlist. Yes. Oh, you guys are going off in the chat. That's awesome. Okay. I'm going to do one more, or actually, oh, so we talk about we talk about touch, we talk about a living wake, which I think gives people opportunity to learn what that is. Disposition options, what to do with your cremated remains. And then this question, this is probably our most delicate question in this deck. I have facilitated some conversations with the patient and family, and we've talked about what they would suggest for their birthday or the anniversary of their death. And not all patients can have that particular conversation, but I think that when I made bereavement calls with those families, having on the anniversary of the death, having had the patient actually tell them what they wanted them to do in honor of them was really special. So again, we can't facilitate all these conversations with every patient and family, but the more that we are open and curious about our patients' end of life preferences, the more that we can try to facilitate specific end of life preference conversations with the patient and family, so that when the family members are grieving, they have confidence that they took care of their loved one or their family member in the way that they wanted to be cared for. I think that's about all that I have. I mean, obviously, I had lots more questions, and we could have had an entire hour of just the game. But I wanted to give you all some additional tools as well than the 2 tools I have. I do have a dementia deck that is coming available September 1st, and this is going to be a this is a tool to help people talk through what they would want if they were living with dementia. And so it's a way to include dementia and end of life preparedness. And so I'm really excited about that deck. It'll be available for pre-sale on our website on September 1st. And yeah, that's kind of my mission. Next is the grief deck, and then a LGBT deck, and we'll keep going. So I appreciate everyone's participation today. You can reach me at thedeathdeck.com or Lisa at thedeathdeck.com. I'm so excited and happy to be speaking with my people in hospice and palliative care. As I mentioned, I've worked in this space almost 20 years, and I am, this is my passion. So I was very happy to be able to share it all with you today. So thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Lisa. What a great presentation. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.